welcome everyone. My name is Henk Heiser. I'm a Senior Lecturer, Curriculum and Learning Design at QUT. And I'm in the steering group for the TELedvisors Special Interest Group. We've got a very exciting session planned for this afternoon. It's a postgraduate showcase for PhD students, candidates, with a focus on advisors in the third space. So, you know, the tensions between professional roles, academic roles, and all that entails. Just a brief thing about TELedvisors itself. It's for those of you who haven't been here before. It's a network, it's a community of practitioners made up of people who work as educational technologists, learning designers, academic developers, and in a host of similar roles. So we all kind of work in what can be called the third space. Some of us are in academic roles, some of us are in professional roles, and that's pretty much what today's webinar is about. So I will get straight into it and introduce the first presenter, which is Evonne Irwin from the University of Newcastle. Evonne has worked in Australian higher education sector since 2008, and before that she worked in TAFE, New South Wales, and before that a bit in publishing as well. She's currently the convener of the Open Foundation Online Enabling Pathways program at the University of Newcastle, which is a very large program. And her research is underpinned by commitment to equity for both staff and students. She won the 2018 NTU Carolyn Alport Scholarship for Postgraduate Feminist Studies for her PhD project. And she will tell you all about that right now.
Thanks, Hank.
Welcome, Evonne.
Thank you. Look, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Awabakal people, who are the traditional owners of the land where I am today in Newcastle. And I'd just like to also say that I am a little bit nervous about presenting this research to everyone today, because we all might understand ourselves as hybrid or third space professionals, but we each have unique histories and experiences, and we inhabit our own particular subjectivities, and these shift and change all the time. And so some of what I've found might resonate with you, and some of it maybe not so much. So that's just what I'm a little bit nervous about. But I'll just explain a bit about how I came to this project. Got my spirit animal, Liz Lemon, there up on screen. So I came here really because I was feeling very constrained in my own third space job. It was a contracted position, and it was never really fully understood by my colleagues and never fully described or reflected in official institutional documentation. So it had sort of grown organically, and in various ways I became quite frustrated, and I found it really hard to reconcile my frustrations with the joy that I had in my job, because I really loved my job. The other reason that I embarked on a PhD was that I saw the writing on the wall. I knew that the job I had was under threat because it wasn't understood and it didn't fit. And a lot of the work I did was invisible. And for me to survive in this higher education, I needed a PhD. So the project has one overarching research question, and it encompasses three sort of sub areas. So the main question is, how does inhabiting an occupational role that crosses academic and professional domains in higher education influence the way work is experienced? And today I'm mainly going to concentrate on the third sub area, which is about how third space work is structured, invisibilized, and misrecognized. And I'm going to sort of dip my toe into the first area, which is about the construction of professional identities. But all of the areas are really interrelated. Oh, there we go. So to do this, I'm going to draw on Foucault's notion of disciplinary power. And I'm going to follow that with a little bit of Sarah Ahmed's work on difference and ambiguity. So viewing the structures of higher education through the lens of disciplinary power, I think can unlock the door to understanding some of the frustrations that I felt and maybe that you feel too in your day-to-day working lives. So disciplinary power, I'm having a bit of fun with it here, but it's really a complex theory. There's obviously a serious side to disciplinary power too, and many of us working in higher education would have experienced this serious side in the light of the restructures and efficiencies that are affecting our sector over the last 12 months or so. But put simply, disciplinary power works to categorise, separate and homogenise subjects, creating hierarchies which operate to both reward and punish those who fit within them. But according to Foucault, if you don't fit within a particular structure, you are invalid or part of the shameful class. Now, this is pretty strong and emotive language, and later Foucault revised his thinking a bit to see power as more productive and not really in possession of only the powerful. But there are many examples where my participants did express feelings of invalidity, where the lack of fit within entrenched structures meant that they needed to operate on the margins of these structures and seek out creative solutions or mourn the loss of missed opportunities. So, for example, in the Hugh level descriptors, these mask the kinds of pedagogical work that many third space professionals do. So for the descriptor for level 7, for example, this includes a list of typical activities, and there's reference to university library work, student services, technical management, small r, research, and administrative work, but there's no mention of pedagogical work there. So not only are pedagogical contributions misrecognised and invisibilised, the Hugh levels also homogenise. And one of my participants, Joanne, expressed this invisibility and homogenisation when she said, "You don't get that sense of professional levels, it's all just one. Unless you're a manager. Maybe if you have manager in your title, maybe they perceive you a little bit different, but there's no real distinction other than that." Most of my participants were frustrated or exasperated by this lack of visibility and acknowledgement of their pedagogical contributions. And these pedagogical contributions actually separate them from other types of professional staff who are described by the Hugh levels. So for third space staff who are in academic positions, there are similar misrecognitions and exclusions in the academic promotions framework, for example. So in most academic promotions frameworks, teaching is usually understood and described in these frameworks as student-facing teaching, meaning that academics who don't have that kind of teaching, they could be involved in educational innovations and developments. It means they don't have access to the kinds of instruments like student surveys that can act to both reward by supplying evidence for promotion, as well as punish within that structure. And other mismatches for academic staff in third space roles include how their research is recognised and how project work is understood within the promotions framework. So these are just a couple of examples of how structures operate in higher education to invalidate third space professionals, and there are many more. I haven't even mentioned the hierarchical and deeply embedded cultural binary of academic versus professional that I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. But the implications for third space professionals then are varied, and they're an overlapping list of frustrations and compromises. But I have to say there are opportunities too, but these opportunities often rely on particular and unique contexts, on creative workarounds, and on the nuanced understandings from leadership in particular situations, rather than on embedded and recognised structures. So the early Foucault would have that we are the shameful class, that we don't fit, we are unpredictable, and disciplinary power does all it can to render us invalid within the structures that we must work in and around. But I prefer to conceptualize this as ambiguity. One of my participants, Michelle, expressed her ambiguity and the insufficiency of the current structures really passionately. And she said, "I'm not convinced that I'm that label. It's because we're labelled what we're labelled in a university that doesn't have anything else." But if we go to Foucault's later work, where power is diffuse and productive, ambiguity can come with power. And one way that third space professionals try to sort of flip the script and speak back to the structures that constrain them is to define themselves. So I looked at the work of the feminist scholar Sara Ahmed, and she says that a necessary condition of ambiguity is the desire to define. And I saw this with the participants that I spoke to. So for them, defining or redefining meant sometimes using the mechanisms that were understood within current structures. So they might use service level agreements or mini organizational charts to outline their roles and responsibilities. But it also meant for them defining new and creative spaces for their work to happen. And this is a powerful way to speak back to the institution. So all of my participants spoke about defining and positioning themselves in creative ways. And these creative ways revolve mostly around establishing and claiming expertise, along with defining and creating spaces of collaboration, which sit outside of the embedded cultural and social understandings of esteem within the structures of higher education. And Anna mentions both expertise and collaboration here, where she says, "I guess whenever I do that first kickoff meeting, there's a slide I always put up. It's the title slide, it's co-design. It's just co-design, co-design, co-design. And we bring our learning design expertise plus your subject matter expertise. This is a collaborative partnership, collaborative co-design, like repeated, repeated, repeated on every slide." So I have to say I interviewed my participants 3 times over the course of about 18 months. And to be honest, similar frustrations regarding ambiguity were expressed in all of the interviews over that whole time. And changing social and cultural understandings takes time. It takes time and effort, especially when the structures don't necessarily reflect reality or support the change. And finally, because I want to end on a positive note, and it isn't all doom and gloom, I think groups like this one are doing wonderful things to change culture and to provide spaces for us to redefine ourselves and develop professional identities amid these hegemonic structures that currently they're insufficient to deal with our ambiguity. So I'd like to say thank you to the TELedvisors steering group, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Evonne. That was great. Can we all show our appreciation? Just in the meantime, we'll probably have time for one question. Tom asked earlier, do you really need a PhD in this field? Is a master's or a professional doctorate not enough?
Oh, well, I suppose in my experience and in the job that I had at the time, it was contracted with soft funding. It wasn't part of a central unit, so it didn't have that sort of structure around it. And so I liked working in, and I still do, love working in the centre that I work in. So for me, to remain there and working in that capacity, I started a PhD to make myself eligible for a future academic position. And that actually happened. So I do have an academic position now, and it's ongoing. So that worked out for me, but I don't think, and I'm not an expert in industrial relations or anything like that, but I don't think it's necessary if you're not really looking at an academic track. I hope that answers the question, Thomas.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
it does. Thanks, Evonne.
Thank you.